When Keanu Reeves stepped into the orphanage, he expected smiles and joy. But as he walked deeper into its shadowed halls, he noticed the silence. A single boy sat alone, eyes filled with fear that whispered a secret too dark for words. What Keanu discovered next would haunt him and force him to act before it was too late. The rain poured heavily as Keanu Reeves stepped out of his car in front of the old crumbling orphanage. The structure stood like a forgotten relic, its windows dark and its paint peeling from years of neglect. Despite the gloomy weather, Keanu adjusted his black coat, determined to bring light and hope to the children waiting inside. His visits to support charitable causes were well known, but something about this place felt different. He just didn't know why. As he walked through the entrance, the creak of the door echoed in the eerily quiet hallway. There was no laughter, no sound of children playing, only a faint, hollow silence that sent a chill down his spine. A woman with a tight, forced smile greeted him. "Welcome, Mr. Reeves. We are honored by your visit," she said, her eyes flicking nervously over his shoulder, as if expecting someone or something. Keanu nodded politely, but his gaze wandered beyond, her scanning the dimly lit interior. Shadows danced against the walls cast by the flickering overhead lights. Something was wrong here. He could feel it. As he moved further inside, he saw a group of children huddled together near a broken fireplace. Their eyes followed him, wide with curiosity, but tinged with something else. Fear. They whispered among themselves, their voices hushed, as if afraid to be overheard. But one child didn't look up. A boy about 14 years old sat alone in the corner, his face half hidden by shadows. His thin frame and hollow cheeks spoke of hardship, but it was his eyes that caught Keanu's attention. Dark, haunted, filled with a sorrow far beyond his years. Keanu felt a strange pull in his chest. He approached slowly, crouching down beside the boy. "Hey, kid," he said softly. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer right away. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Eli," he whispered finally, his voice barely audible. Keanu smiled gently. "Nice to meet you, Eli. Is everything okay here?" Eli's eyes flicked, toward the shadows where the other children stood watching. His lips trembled as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, he shook his head, his small body trembling. "It's not safe here," Eli murmured, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the heavy air. Keanu felt a chill run down his spine. He leaned in closer. "What do you mean? What's not safe?" Before Eli could answer, a sudden, sharp noise echoed through the orphanage, a crash from somewhere deeper inside followed by a long, creaking groan. The children gasped, and the woman from the entrance rushed over, her smile gone, replaced by a look of panic. "Please, Mr. Reeves," she said urgently. "Some areas are off limits, for your safety." Keanu stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Eli. He gave the boy a reassuring nod before turning to the woman. "Safety? For whom?" The woman swallowed hard, unable to meet his piercing gaze. "The children are fine. You're here to make them happy. Let's focus on that." But Keanu wasn't convinced. He knew danger when he felt it, and this place was soaked in it. Something dark was hiding in the shadows of the orphanage. And as he looked back at Eli, he realized one thing. He wasn't leaving until he found out what it was. The crash still echoed faintly in Keanu's mind as he followed the nervous woman into the main room. She forced a strained smile, her fingers twisting together like ropes of tension. A group of children sat at long wooden tables, their eyes darting between Keanu and the darkened hallway where the noise had come from. A cold draft swept through the room, making the flickering light overhead sway. "Let's meet the rest of the kids," the woman said, her voice tight. She gestured to the tables as if hoping the children's presence would erase the unease. Keanu's gaze swept the room. Most of the kids wore forced smiles, but their hunched shoulders and quiet whispers betrayed their fear. He felt it like a weight in the air, something heavy, something wrong. His eyes drifted back to the corner where Eli now sat alone, head lowered, fingers tracing nervous patterns on the table. He walked over to the boy again, ignoring the woman's subtle attempts to redirect his attention. "Hey, Eli," he said quietly. "I'm back. You okay?" Eli glanced up, his eyes darting toward the hallway again before meeting Keanu's. "They don't like it when you ask questions," he whispered. "Who doesn't?" Keanu pressed, leaning in. "The shadows," Eli murmured, so quietly it was almost lost. "They're always watching. They make people forget." Keanu felt a chill crawl up his spine. The boy's words echoed with a strange, eerie truth that clung to the air like smoke. He crouched lower, making sure no one else could hear. "Who makes people forget? The staff?" Eli shook his head, his eyes wide and filled with terror. "No, it's the things in the dark, the ones you can't see." The room seemed to grow colder as Eli spoke. Keanu's breath turned visible in the sudden chill. He turned his head slightly, peering into the hallway where the earlier crash had come from. The light there flickered again, and for just a moment, a shadow shifted, one that didn't belong to anyone. "Mr. Reeves?" The woman's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She was closer now, her expression tense, her smile completely gone. "We should move on." Keanu straightened, his eyes never leaving Eli's. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. The woman's lips thinned. "You're here to make the children happy, not to ask questions." Keanu's jaw tightened. "I'm here for the children," he said. "If something's wrong, I'm going to find out what it is." The tension snapped. The woman's pleasant mask cracked. Her eyes turned cold. "You shouldn't have come here, Mr. Reeves." Behind her, the flickering light in the hallway went out completely. The darkness seemed to stretch, swallowing the space beyond the doorway. A soft, chilling whisper echoed from within the shadows, a sound that didn't belong to any human voice. Keanu turned toward the sound, his heart pounding, but his resolve unshaken. Whatever this orphanage was hiding, he would uncover it. And he would protect Eli from the darkness. The air in the orphanage grew thick, heavy with the kind of silence that made every breath feel louder. Keanu Reeves narrowed his eyes as he stared into the dark hallway, his instincts screaming at him that danger was close. The whispering had stopped, but the chill lingered. He looked back at Eli. The boy sat frozen, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. Keanu crouched beside him, placing a firm hand on his trembling shoulder. "I'm here, Eli. I won't let anything happen to you." Eli's lip quivered. He pointed a shaking finger toward the hallway. "It comes when the lights flicker. You can't stop it. Nobody can. They tried, but they're gone now." "Gone?" Keanu frowned. "Who's gone?" Before Eli could answer, the woman who had been guiding Keanu spoke again, her voice sharper now, dripping with thinly veiled hostility. "Mr. Reeves, it's time for you to leave. This visit is over." Keanu stood, towering over her. "I don't think so. I'm not leaving until I understand what's happening here." His tone was calm, but there was steel behind it, an unshakable will that would not back down. The woman's eyes darted nervously toward the darkened hallway. She licked her lips, her hands trembling as she clutched a set of keys. "You don't understand," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid something was listening. "If you stay, it'll come for you too." A faint creak echoed from deep within the shadows. It was slow, deliberate, like a predator testing its prey. The children around the room huddled closer together, their small hands covering their ears as if trying to block out a sound only they could hear. Keanu's eyes followed the sound. His pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step toward the hallway. "Wait!" Eli cried out, gripping Keanu's arm with surprising strength. "Don't go in there, it wants you to." Keanu turned back, his eyes gentle but determined. "Sometimes the only way to defeat the darkness is to walk straight into it," he said softly. Eli's fingers tightened. "It'll make you forget who you are. That's what it does. That's why they can't leave." Keanu felt the weight of the boy's words. "It makes you forget." He glanced at the other children, their faces pale and drawn, eyes filled with the kind of fear that should never live in the heart of a child. The woman's breathing grew rapid. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't provoke it. If it takes you, there's no coming back." A sudden crash erupted from the hallway, and the door at the end slammed shut on its own. The flickering light above went out completely, plunging the area into darkness. The air turned ice cold. Keanu clenched his fists. His breath came in sharp, visible clouds. He took a slow, deliberate step toward the shadows, his heart thundering but his mind clear. "Stay here," he said to Eli, his voice low but steady. "Mr. Reeves, no." Eli's plea echoed, but Keanu moved forward without hesitation. Stepping into the dark, the whispers returned, circling him, seeping into his mind. "Forget," they hissed. "Give in. Become one of us." Keanu closed his eyes, grounding himself in the truth. "I know who I am. I am not afraid." As he pressed deeper into the shadows, the darkness seemed to push back, alive and suffocating. But Keanu kept moving, each step a defiance, each breath a refusal to surrender. What he found waiting for him in the blackness would change everything. The darkness wrapped around Keanu Reeves like a living, breathing entity, thick and suffocating, pressing against his senses with whispers that clawed at his mind. Forget. Leave. Give in. But Keanu's grip on reality was ironclad. He focused on the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a grounding force against the encroaching void. He kept walking, each step deliberate, his instincts sharpened to a razor's edge. Suddenly, the flicker of a faint glow caught his eye. It came from the end of the hallway, a pale, sickly light seeping through the crack of a door. The whispers intensified, hissing warnings and threats. Keanu reached for the door handle. The metal was icy cold under his fingers. He hesitated for just a moment, then pushed the door open. Inside, the room was small and barren, except for a single chair bolted to the floor in the center. Thick leather straps hung from its arms and legs, worn from use. The walls were covered in deep scratches, as if something or someone had clawed at them in desperation. And in the corner, barely visible, was a figure. Keanu stepped closer. The figure was a man, his skin pale and eyes vacant, staring into nothingness. His clothes hung loosely on his frail body and his lips moved silently, repeating a single word over and over. Forget, forget, forget. Keanu knelt beside him, his voice calm but firm. "Who did this to you? What's happening here?" The man's eyes flickered with a brief spark of recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it came. His hand trembled as he raised it, pointing toward the ceiling. Keanu looked up. Above them, strange symbols were etched into the wood, spirals and jagged lines that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. A sudden wave of nausea hit him. The room spun, and for a moment he felt the grip of the whispers tightening around his mind. Forget. Let go. Become one of us. But Keanu fought back. His determination surged like fire through his veins. "No," he whispered fiercely. "You won't take me." He gritted his teeth, focusing on his breath, his memories, the truth of who he was. The pressure eased and the whispers faltered, as if his defiance had weakened their hold. He turned to the man again. "Who are they? How do I stop this?" The man's lips trembled, his voice a dry rasp. "The children, they're trapped." His eyes filled with sudden terror. "Don't let them take you too." A loud crash erupted behind them. The door slammed shut on its own, and the darkness surged forward like a tidal wave. The air grew colder, the room shrinking as shadows twisted and writhed. Keanu clenched his fists. He wasn't going to let this evil consume anyone else. He had faced monsters before. This one would be no different. He stood tall, his eyes blazing, with resolve. "You picked the wrong place," he said to the darkness. "I fight for them." And as the shadows closed in, he braced himself to bring the battle into the light. The darkness surged, a writhing storm of shadows that clawed at Keanu Reeves with unseen hands. Whispered curses filled the air, each syllable like ice digging into his skull. Forget. Surrender. Become nothing. But Keanu stood firm, a flicker of fire in his heart. He wasn't just a man facing fear. He was a protector, a force of resolve. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. The symbols on the ceiling seemed to pulse with life, feeding the darkness, anchoring it to this place. The symbols, he muttered. They're the key. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small silver pendant given to him by a monk during a film shoot years ago. It bore ancient protective inscriptions. He didn't know if it would work, but belief was sometimes stronger than knowledge. He held the pendant high. "I remember who I am," he shouted into the abyss. "I remember every choice, every truth, every life I've touched. You can't take that from me." The shadows screamed. A blast of cold wind roared through the room, but Keanu kept his ground. With a swift, decisive motion, he reached up and clawed at the symbols on the ceiling. His fingers burned as he scraped them away. The darkness howled in fury. The man in the corner gasped, his eyes clearing. The whispers faded from his lips. "You're breaking it." Keanu gritted his teeth, fighting through the pain. He tore at the last of the spirals, feeling the air lighten as the symbols lost their power. Suddenly, the shadows began to unravel. Light pierced through the cracks in the walls, flooding the room with warmth. The grip of the darkness weakened, retreating like smoke on the wind. In the doorway, Eli appeared, his eyes wide with hope and awe. "You did it." Keanu turned, breathing hard but smiling. "We did it, Eli. We didn't give in." As the last of the shadows vanished, the entire orphanage seemed to change. The heavy gloom lifted, the cold dissipated. The other children, once pale and frightened, began to laugh and smile as if waking from a long nightmare. The woman who had tried to force Keanu to leave collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. It's gone," she whispered. "I couldn't fight it before, thank you." Keanu knelt beside her. "The children are safe now, but they'll need more than safety. They'll need love, truth, and someone to care." She nodded, her hands trembling. "I'll make sure of it." Keanu placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, then turned to Eli. "Come on, kid. Let's get you home." As they stepped outside into the sunlight, Keanu felt the weight lift from his soul. He had walked into the darkness and brought the light back with him.